Good evening, everyone, and welcome to BT's Fly Tying Friday. Tonight, the 20th of February, we're delighted to have Ian Anderson at the vise, and you're going to be wowed when you see what he has to share. The weekly tip, we're going to go a little bit further into the Grant and the Pott weaves. We had a lot of questions on that, and we'll dig into that a little bit further tonight. For now, though, we're the Beatties from Boise, Idaho, and we are delighted to be adding uh, our new and good friend, uh, Ian Anderson. And you can see right there what he will be sharing with you tonight. Ian Anderson, having taught classes at a local shop in Indianapolis for 13 years, Ian discovered that he very much enjoyed teaching and specifically fly tying. This led to the creation of Dressed Irons. That's a YouTube channel as an avenue to continue teaching and learning about fly tying. I believe it's a website as well, but Ian will tell us about that later. This in turn has led him to focus on some of the classic flies and specifically learning and teaching tying techniques employed many years ago. In the recent past, Ian has tumbled down the rabbit hole of Carrie Steven's streamers and the pursuit of learning her methods for pattern creation as well, and why and how she tied the streamers the way she did. He has always maintained that we are all learning on some level, and the pursuit of this history has impressed Ian more and more each year, just how little he really knows. With that thought in mind, Ian, the vice is all yours, and the program is yours. Go for it, partner.
Well, thank you very much, Al. I'm very happy to be here and do this for everybody. Very impressed about the turnout. I don't think I've ever even had half this many people in an actual live fly tying class. So this is fun. Yeah, I the fly tying is something that I really got into in the fly shop, and subsequently found that I very much enjoyed teaching fly tying to people. And when I left the shop in 2018, I realized that I kind of wanted to get something going. And of course, YouTube was getting to be a bigger and bigger thing at the time. So I went ahead and started the Dressed Irons fly tying channel. And subsequently, there's also a website along with it. And the focus is basically tying all kinds of different flies. I tie trout flies, smallmouth flies, saltwater flies, as well as classics. What I really am drawn to is some of these old patterns that are 50, 60, 100 years old. And not only the flies themselves, but the techniques that they used, because a lot of the modern tools that we have and materials were not around even 40, 50 years ago. So you had to have different techniques to get the results for the flies that you wanted. The Carrie Stevens ones are in particular very interesting to me, even though I don't fish them for up in Maine for landlocked salmon, not nearly as much as I'd like to. They do come in handy for smallmouth in my local area, and they're just fun. But she had a very, very interesting technique as to how she put her flies together. And I've learned a great deal and am learning more and more as I go along. So this is the white ghost. That's the fly I'm going to tie up for you tonight. And as I go through this, I'll explain the recipe to you and everything as I go through this. I'm also going to be recording this. Oh, well, there's the recipe right there. The hook that I'm using is actually, it's a Partridge CS15 in a size 4. And but the tag on this is flat silver tinsel, has an orange body and a flat silver rib to it. There's an underbelly of some peacock herl and white bucktail. There's a throat of some white hackles. I'm using schlappen. And then the wing itself is made of there is a golden pheasant crest also in the throat. There's a golden pheasant crest in the wing. And then the actual wing up here is 4 white hackles, a shoulder of silver pheasant body feather, and a cheek of jungle cock. I'm going to go ahead and tie the fly here for you and show you how that's done. And then when we're done with that and any questions, I'll actually show you how I process these wings, because the wings on these are processed ahead of time. So these are already massaged and glued together and everything. And I'll explain all that after I get done with the fly. So I'll go ahead and get started here. Now, I do like to yammer when I'm tying flies. If anybody's watched my videos, they've probably seen that. I actually had a few people comment at different times that they think I talk too much while I'm tying. But my view is I try to impart as much information for everybody as I can. But saying that is mostly saying that if you have a question or anything on any step or any technique, anywhere along the way, chime right in, let me know. I'll pause and explain things. I'll go over things a second time for you. So that's the hook that I'm using. It's a Partridge CS15 in a size 4. And I'll explain a little bit when I show you how I do the wings, why I'm using this particular hook. It is a large hook. It's a 10X large hook. I'm going to use a Danville 210 denier in white for a base layer of thread here. Whenever you're tying these flies and you're using a floss body, even though it's a rayon floss that I'll be tying on here, I like to use a white thread underneath, because if you use a darker thread, the floss itself gets dark in the water, and it will get even darker because of that base layer of thread underneath it. So if you have a white layer of thread under it, it just helps it to keep more of its orange color and a little bit more of its brightness in the water. So I'm just putting a base layer of thread down here. This is probably the most tedious part of these flies, is going from one end of the shank to the other. And that's part of the reason I'm using a 210 denier at this step, is it's just a little bit bigger and it'll go from one end to the other a little faster. Now there's no tail on the white ghost. There is a tag of tinsel, just silver tinsel. I'm using a Danville size 10 in a silver and gold mylar tinsel. But because of the fact there is no tail, it actually helps us tie this a little bit quicker, because I can attach the tinsel for the tag and the rib right here, tying this in with the gold side up. Often, if you have a tail with the tag underneath it, you have to put the tag in, secure it, trim it away, and then put your tail in, then put your rib back in, and then your body floss. But in this case, I don't have one, so I can go ahead and put the floss in here, work my way back up to this end, get the floss on, and then put the tag in, and then open up my wraps to get the rib. The floss is just a orange. I'm using a 4-strand rayon. It's a Danville 4-strand rayon in orange. I don't have the label on the spool, unfortunately. You want to get something, probably in 13 or 14 inches here. You definitely don't want to come up short on this. If you're going to tie this to present this, you can have the tag come all the way up to the end of the body if you want. I tie most of mine just for fishing, so I generally will just have the tag come in so it's far enough so that it'll get tied in nice and secure. If you have it go all the way to the end here, it just gives you a much smoother underbody underneath that floss. Any bumps or whatever often will translate up through the floss. But as you can see here, that little bump that I have right there is pretty inconsequential. But I suppose, depending on why you were framing this and presenting it, you would want to put in a little bit of extra effort. I'll run my thread all the way back up to the end of the body. One of the nice things with this particular hook is it has what's called a loop eye on it. So it's not a closed eye like a lot of different hooks. It loops back on itself. This area, the nice thing about that is basically this whole area right here where it loops back, that's going to be your headspace. So it's easy to know right where the body's going to be. So with all of that secured and tied in, I'll go ahead and wrap in my floss. Now I'm going to give you a little tip here too. in case you haven't worked with floss like this that often, if you have a situation where you're wrapping this in and that floss starts to spread out on you as you're going forward and you get strands that are creeping forward, it's because you don't have all of these strands under the same tension in the same direction. So if you bring your floss around and then stroke this in a forward leaning direction like this, when you do that first wrap, then that will prevent that from spreading out most often. You're just going to put these in. I overlap just slightly. It gives me just a little bit smoother body, and I don't have to be concerned that maybe I get a little gap in there if I just overlap just a little bit. This time of year, you do want to use an emery board on your fingers if you end up having rough hands, if you do any outdoor work or anything like that, because the air is so dry, the slightest roughness in your hands can shred this floss very, very easy. So I'll bring this all the way up to the end of the body and be grateful that I cut that long enough and I didn't lose control of it, because it all come unwrapped if I did.
Ian, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think I read someplace that the early salmon fly tire is actually tied with silk gloves.
Some did. Now, I don't know. It's really interesting. Just a little sidebar. If you ever look at a video called The Lost World of Hardy, came out probably about 15, almost 18 years ago. They show one of the old guys who tied by hand. Now, he wasn't wearing any kind of gloves then, but I imagine that at some point they were. And part of that is because the original silks would pick up dirt off your fingers and oils really, really easy. And so I think that's why they were wearing gloves. And some people I know nowadays do, especially if they're using genuine silk instead of a rayon. But I don't know if the silk would help in terms of, pulling away and tearing at that floss or not. So with that in place, I'm going to go ahead and you'll see that the tinsel flips over to the silver side. And now I'm going to wrap in my tag. When I wrap in right here, I make certain I get at least one wrap tight in against the back there so I don't end up with any thread wraps showing. And then I can bring this around and open that up so that I get my rib in. Now, on these long feather wing streamers, there is not a standard set number of ribs. Like if you're tying a traditional wet fly has 5, and even a lot of your traditional salmon flies and spay flies will have 5 wraps of the rib. These, it's not a set number of wraps, but what it is instead is a nice even spacing. So if you like a little bit wider space and maybe a little less flash, you can broaden that out and only get, maybe 5 wraps in here, or you can tighten that up. It also, I imagine, depends on the size of the hook that you're using and the width of the tinsel. But it's more important that you get all of that nice and evenly spaced. So I'm going to secure all that down. I'm going to bring my thread back down just into the body just a little bit. Now this is where I'm going to tie on the peacock herl as part of the underbelly. She'll often have peacock herl in on the top as part of the wing, but in this particular one, she does have the peacock herl underneath, and it is underneath the bucktail. So it's usually 4 or 5 strands, and these are off of a feather. You can use strung herls if you would rather. You're going to tie those in just a little bit into the body space, and they're going to go just a little bit past the bend of the hook. I'll trim away the excess. Now, the interesting thing is, for a long time, as I tied these flies, I would tie them almost like wet flies from the standpoint of I would have anchored this in and the bucktail and everything up here towards in the headspace. But what I found is when I read Sharon Wright's book on featherwing streamers, heritage featherwing streamers, she deconstructed, I think it was the Blue Devil. And what she found was that Carrie Stevens actually secured her bucktail and materials for the belly in even further back. And I haven't quite figured out exactly why that is, other than I know she tied by hand. So it would be much more cumbersome to try and get everything in up in this small headspace. But she tied it even further back, and then she would tie in the throat pieces just right up in front, kind of working her way forward, trying to cover up some thread wraps. She would also tie almost the whole fly with the white thread and then go to black and whatever color band she needed when she actually finished the head. Now, I haven't perfected that technique yet, so I'm going to do what I normally do. The head of the white ghost is black with an orange band. But I mentioned earlier about the black thread darkening up the orange in the body. It does the same thing in the head. So if I make this head all black and then I put the orange band in the middle, it's really, really dark. And in the water, I think it would pretty much disappear. So what I got in the habit of doing was at this point changing over to my bobbin just got messed up here. Hold on. Changing over to the color for the band, which in this case is orange. I'm going to use a uni-thread 8/0 in a pumpkin color, because then I'll tie in the throat and the wing and everything with the orange, and I'll have a nice orange base underneath that head, and then I can just put the black bands in at the end. I know that's not how she did it, and again, I am working on figuring that technique out and perfecting it, but it accomplishes more or less the same thing. So I'm going to start with my orange thread all the way back here, pretty much where I tied in the peacock herl. I've got some bucktail here. It's generally pretty sparse. You want to be careful when you're tying these in, because a lot of people will want to tie in a large clump of bucktail. If you tie that in and it's too much, it will actually cause the fly to not ride vertical in the water. It can ride horizontal or even invert in the water. So you don't want too much, because it does add some buoyancy underneath. That's going to be about as long as the peacock herl. Securing that in, I'll trim away the excess. Now, one thing you'll notice on this bucktail is that it's flaring a lot. That's because she preferred to use the bucktail at the base of the actual bucktail. And if anybody's ever tied any clouser minnows with the hairs at the base of the bucktail, they know that they are more like the body hair in the sense that they're spongy and they'll compress. So what I like to do once I get to this point is then just do a few gentle collecting wraps, maybe 4 or 5, and then come back up to the headspace, and that kind of collects them back a little bit. Another side note, if you've ever seen or heard of Thunder Creek streamers, Keith Fulcher also preferred to use the straighter hair at the base of the tail. And I haven't quite figured that out yet either, because it does the same thing, especially on the Thunder Creeks. You tie those in the middle and they just poof right out. So with that tied in, I'm now ready to put in the throat. And the throat is just I'm using some white schlappen for this. She tied the throats in, as I said, in a manner as to try and, as she's progressing, to cover up thread wraps. The throat hairs go about halfway down the belly. So you tie one end right on the very bottom here. Trim away the excess. Then I'm going to move my thread forward just a little bit, and I'm going to tie another one on this side, kind of up at an angle, and on this side, the idea is trying to cover up some of these thread wraps. Now keep in mind, when we tie the wing on also, there's going to be a lot of those thread wraps getting covered up. But again, this is where you would think all of these were tied in at the same spot, just a big old clump of hackle fibers here for the throat, but there actually is a method to, what she did and how she did it, which is what I find interesting. Trim away the excess on that. These slopping feathers that I have are kind of a little sparse. I may have gone through all the good ones already that would have longer barbs on here, but those will get all wrapped in. And then the last clump I'll tie over on my side here. As I'm tying those in, I'll get a few wraps and sometimes use my thumbnail to kind of push down just to get some of those spread out a little bit. Those I got on this side were tied too much towards the top, but these I think is more what you're looking for. Most of her streamers that I have tied from the Hilliard book, which is what I've been working from, have just the white bucktail in as the belly, as I said, and then they have a throat. This one actually has a crest of golden pheasant crest feather in as part of the throat as well. There's a number of different patterns that she has that have that. So I've got the golden pheasant here. What you're going to do is you're going to take a shorter one out for the throat, and then in the wing there's a longer one. So I have a nice long one that's going to go in up here for my wing, and the shorter one, because the one that goes in for the throat, you only want it to go back about the length of the throat. I found what works for me to tie these in, because often the curve on those is kind of wonky. But what works for me is to place this up here and tie in almost the base of the feather right here. A couple of wraps, getting it centered on the bottom as best I can. Get a couple more wraps in here, not too tight, because what we want to do is we want to then pull that feather to the right. And often I find it just slides right in on top, just like that. Again, these will straighten out in the water as you're fishing that, but it's a matter of getting that tied in so it stays right on the bottom. There are things that you can do if you want to take the steps to wet your golden pheasant and get a nice curve to it. Again, if I were presenting this, I might go to that trouble, but since this is going to be just a fishing fly, I'm just going to leave that the way it is. So that is the throat. I'm going to go ahead and clean this space up just a little bit, smoothing this out. It's part of the reason I used an 8/0 thread. And then I'm going to tie in for the wing. As I mentioned, the wing is a golden pheasant crest, and then the hackles and shoulder and everything. I'm going to tie this in the same technique. This one has a little bit of a curve out to it. I'll see if I can kind of get that out of there. Place this right on top, get 2 or 3 wraps, and then take this end of it and just pull it a little bit my way, because you want this curve to be just right down across the bend there. So this feather just barely makes it. Get a few more wraps to secure it. Trim that away, and we're ready for the rest of our wing. Again, I'm smoothing this off a little bit for the rest of that wing. And the wing is, like I said, it's 4 white hackles. These are whiting American rooster capes. So there's 2 on this side and 2 on the other side. There's a shoulder of a silver pheasant body feather, which is kind of interesting to work with. This is one of the first times I've worked with this. And then the cheek of the jungle cock on there. Like I said, these are pre-assembled. I do this ahead of time to make the wings, because then, and I use rubber cement to glue these together, but then I can just trim away, once I get the ends even here, I can trim away those rachis there, and then I have nice little handles right up in the headspace here for tying in those wings. You can certainly tie in these the old-fashioned way, meaning get your 4 together, hold them to get all 4 of them up here, tie those in, then tie a shoulder on each side, and then the cheek on each side if you want, which is funny because it's not really the old-fashioned way, because some of these flies are over 100 years old that Carrie tied, and that's how she processed them. She did the same thing. And there's a little bit of debate as to why she did it that way. But she would pre-assemble her wings just like this, and then she would have them ready whenever she needed to tie a fly. So that should be, you want, most of these are going to go just right down along the sides, ideally. There are some wet flies, or I should say feather wing streamers, that you tie in where you tie them in so that the wing cocks up at an angle, but most of hers all just go run right down horizontal with the shank of the hook. So now I'll clean this space up for our resulting head. All I'm doing here is just smoothing this off, filling in some space, making certain it's smooth. The other thing is, if you have a dark material underneath, you can probably even see on the camera how the dark end of that jungle cock right there darkens up that orange. So if you have any that darkens up that orange, especially where the orange band is going to be, you want to just put a few more wraps in that area to make certain that it gets covered up. I'm not worried about it in the back there because I'm going to have some black thread on there.
We do have a question, Ian, and
Yes.
it's from Aaron, and he wants to know, how long did Carrie like to have the wings?
She normally, these are a little bit on the long side. She normally had them about as long as the underbelly and everything. I'm going to say 3/8 to about a half an inch or so behind the bend of the hook. But again, there's some debate on that, because some people will have them even longer than this, if you look on some flies, and then some shorter. Even in the Hilliard book, when I look at the flies that are tied, even by Carrie Stevens, some of them are about that long on some flies, but then on some others, they barely just go past the bend of the hook. I think it's, and I'll talk a little bit when I talk about how I process the wings and the proportions of the hook here on that. But really, it's kind of up to you, I think. If you want them a little bit shorter, make them a little bit shorter. Nice thing about
Ian, don't you think a lot of it had to do with the materials she had available?
Yes, I do. And that's exactly where it's interesting learning some of this, because, she didn't have these really, really nice genetic, whiting American rooster capes that we have. And I don't know, you can get strung rooster hackle, and you can use it in these flies. And I don't know back then how long they were. So I don't know if her hooks were even a little shorter than this. It's hard to say. But as I said, when I show you how I process the wings here, I've got another partridge hook, a CS59X that I want to show you, and I'll talk a little bit about the material that goes in the wings. So with my orange thread secured, I'm going to go ahead and attach the black thread. I'm using a Danville 70 denier in black. The shoulders on these, by the way, most of the shoulders will go about halfway down the body. So the tip of that usually is just somewhere around halfway down. There are one or two that go longer, and there's one that even goes broader. It's I forget the name of the fly. Most of the shoulder hackles will just kind of sweep along with the regular white hackles, but some of them she has, they're very, very wide. So here I'm just going to attach my black thread towards the back end of the head here. This is just to get it started, a little bit of a jam knot. And all I want to do is, generally, I think it's, as a rule of thumb, it's dividing the head into thirds. So you'll have a black band, it's about a third of the head length, an orange band that's about a third, and another black band. These two seem to differ. Yeah, see, that orange thread there, I'm going to have to work on that technique to figure out how she does it with the white throughout, because that would show up white, but that orange thread shouldn't have been there. But there you go. So when I do my whip finish here, by the way, I'm putting a little wax on my thread. And the reason is I'm only going to do about a 4-turn whip finish. And if you're not careful, especially with this nylon thread, it stretches and you end up with the thread pops back out from underneath those wraps when you cut it. I have found that putting some wax on my thread prevents that from happening because it grips, the thread grips itself better. Now I'll attach on the front end. Second verse, same as the first for the most part. I kind of like these to have a little bit, like I said, that pronounced color. Some people prefer not to. Actually, some people have even online admonished me for even having the band of color in there. A little more wax on my thread here, and I will do my whip finish. You don't have to do a whip finish by hand, by the way. You can use your tool. It's how I kind of learned, and for the most part, how I do my whip finishes on a lot of things. Now, I would normally use some Fly Tight head cement. It's a nice alcohol-based head cement, non-toxic, because I like it. It's nice and thin, and it soaks right down into those thread wraps. If you watch any of my videos, you'll see me use it. So I'll do that first to secure all of that. But then I come back on these, and you're not looking for a real glossy head on these, like you would say on a wet fly. But she did put some lacquer on the thread wraps here to just protect them. So I'm using some Vineyards Celire. This is a clear lacquer. And I'll come back and put 2 coats on here. Again, not looking, you could certainly, if you wanted to, you could certainly put 3 or 4 coats on and get a really nice glossy head if you wanted to. Again, if you want to present this and, add a little flash to it or whatever, a little more bling, you could do that. But in terms of fishing,
Aaron commented that wasn't the band in the head her signature?
yes, it is her signature, but at the same time, the signature isn't that, well, let's put it this way. It isn't to signify that Carrie Stevens tied that fly. This is what a lot of people think, is that if it has the band in it, that means it was one that was tied by her. And that is a false assumption. I forget the gentleman's name. I was just reading about him the other day. When she sold, yeah.
Falcons.
Oh,
the guy she sold.
Yes.
Sold the company to.
Yeah, that's right. When she sold her in the 50s, I think it was, when she sold her company, this guy was the only guy that ever saw her tie a fly. And that's because she sat down and showed him her style and her techniques, how she tied everything. And she sold him the rights to all the flies and tying them and everything else. But she stipulated that every fly that had a band of color in the head, he had to put it in there. And that was to signify that that was a Carrie Stevens fly, original pattern, not one tied by her, but it was her pattern. So some people, they have their different feelings on it in terms of putting that in or not putting it in. My view is that it was there for a reason. She wanted it in there for a reason. So I have no problems putting them in there.
Ian, would you ever use UV on the head instead of lacquer?
No, I wouldn't. And I tell you why. I'm not a big fan of the UV stuff. When it first came out, I did a number of classes on all the different UV brands that were out there. Clear Cure Goo, Deer Creek, then Solar Res, and then there was True Fly or something like this that used a blue light and everything. I find that they crack often, and they crack and chip off when you fish them. And so I'm not a huge fan. Plus, I've known a number of people that actually have developed allergies to them. So they start to use them and they're fine. But when these things flash off, when you shine the light on them, there's fumes that come off and people develop these allergies. And a number of guys that I used to tie with often, they couldn't be around it anymore. So I tend to stay away from it. I like epoxy, regular old epoxy better if I wanted something really durable.
I think Tim Flagler has that allergy.
Yeah, Mike was talking about that last night, as a matter of fact, in our Zoom session, that he does. So, if that's if you like to use it, use it. I do use it for different things in fly fishing, but generally not my fly tying.
Ian, that fly is stunning. Absolutely stunning.
Thank you.
And you spun it together in so few minutes that I feel ashamed.
Well, I've done a few hundred of them in the last few years, so I'm well practiced.
Excellent.
Does anybody have any questions or anything? Well, if not, and if you do, chime in anytime. Like I said, while I'm doing this next part, I'm going to switch my camera over to, this is my tying area, and I'm going to show you how I actually process the feathers that go into the different wings. Now, the jungle cock, I've already processed this, and this is pretty simple. When you peel these off, all the fluffy stuff you just take off, and then you're just left with that nice nail on the end of it. Now, this is one of the partridge CS15 hooks that I mentioned. And these hackles came off of that whiting rooster cape that I mentioned. This hook here is another partridge hook. It is a partridge CS5-9X. If you can see that, I hope there's no shine on there. This is a 9X long streamer hook. I often use these because of the fact that some of my capes, I've already picked through a lot of the larger, nicer feathers. And so all I have are some of the shorter, smaller ones. And in that case, if I were to take a feather out and I didn't quite have the length, you get rid of all this fluff here, and I only have that much length, this hook is going to be too big for it. So that's when I would go down to that smaller hook. Now, traditionally, these I think are closer to the size and length that Carrie Stevens preferred and she liked. And they're fun to tie on, these big streamers and everything. But the one advantage also to these is you're not winding as much thread down the shank and back up. So I'm going to try and zoom in here a little bit and see if that's still in focus. That looking focused to you all?
That's excellent.
Yes.
Okay. Well, what I do when I process these is I'm going to take two of these feathers, and I generally will match them up. So in this case, if I were going to process a bunch of these for say a dozen flies or a half dozen flies, I would take out 4 hackles and set them in a pile. So that's for one fly, and then another 4 for another fly, and so on. A lot of people will ask, are you careful to take them from like the right side and the left side of the cape so that you get them and they have the right curve and everything, and when they come together? I generally don't, because the American capes that I get, most of these, they don't have any droop to them. They're nice and straight, and they flow very well. So I don't have to consider often getting them from both, each side. So I'll take 2 of those hackles and I'll match up the tips there. And then generally one of the first things I do, and some of this is just experience, I know I'm not going to need any of this stuff. I'm just going to cut that off. Then I'm going to put this down and start taking a look at how long I want the tail to be, whether I want it a little bit longer or I want it a little bit shorter. Right about here, which is going to end up being just about an eye length behind the eye of the hook, is where I'll have the base of that wing. So I'll start. Yeah.
Ian, could you move that hook up a little closer to that anvil? There, perfect.
Okay.
You're just down a little bit low in the corner.
No, that's fine. Thank you. So once I actually determine that's about the length that I want, then I'm going to figure out right about here on that rachis is going to be the very butt end of that wing up next to the head. So I'll just peel a little bit of these barbs off, working my way down. Again, some of this is experience. So, you're going to be a little bit quicker to do this because of, you've kind of learned it and everything. But if you just keep going back and forth and getting these just the right length that you want, and again, that's where this return loop is kind of nice, because that's pretty much going to be the back end of the head space. So now I have my wings, at least the 2 white portions of my wings, all processed. Now, in this case, the shoulders are kind of nice on this. These are interesting feathers. I bought a couple of different packages of this silver pheasant body feathers, and was amazed at how few that I could actually use out of those 2 packages for these flies. A lot of the feathers just they were busted up or whatever. It's kind of like when you buy a package of mallard flank, and you're looking to make some Hornbergs or something, and you realize you don't get nearly as many as you thought you would out of it. So anyway, this is really simple. Whether it's this or if it's any other pheasant feathers that you're going to use for the shoulder, I just peel all the fluff off to start out with. A lot of times that rachis will split for me, and that's fine. I'm just going to push this onto the wing, and I'll put the base of that right to the base of the wing there and see what my length is. If that's too long, then all I have to do is just take a few more, try to keep my hands in the camera there, just take a few more barbs off, and then I'll lay that back down again. If I need to, I can just take a few more off.
Ian,
only
is that silver pheasant the same as the Lady Amherst, or is it different?
No, it is different. It is different. Um, so then I just keep taking those off, and you'll notice that during that time I shortened it up, but the edges of the feather still pretty much match the hackles on the base of the wing. The only feathers that get to be really persnickety when you're doing that with hers is if she wants a golden pheasant, because these, you can pull these out and they could be really nice and wide. These are all busted up, but nice and wide here. But then as you start pulling barbs off, it's going to narrow the ends up here. So those are the only ones that get really kind of tricky in terms of getting a wing, a shoulder rather, that's going to be long enough and wide enough. But that gets me the shoulder there. So if you all, can everybody see that clear enough?
Yes, it's looking good to me.
Okay. All right. Now, when I glue these together, I use a rubber cement. This is just your everyday Elmer's rubber cement. I do not know what particular varnish or lacquer she used when she would do these. And I don't know that anybody knows. But I've heard other people used Dave's Flex Cement. There's some other, you could probably even use some silicone if you wanted to use some regular old silicone. Don Bastian, his old blog is still out on the internet, and he's got an interesting article out there on using the rubber cement in these. And what they found, they did some research, and what they found was it's not brittle. It holds these wings together very, very well. I got another set here I'll show you. It holds the shoulders and the cheeks and everything together very, very well. It's all glued in right in here. But the nice thing about that is that when this fly is being fished in the water, all the glue and everything really helps to anchor this whole area as this is swimming through the water, but it frees up this area to flutter around a lot more as this is swimming through the water. And he found that it was very, very durable. It could easily last a number of fish before the wings started to get busted up. So that's what I use. Now, my method for doing this, if I can keep all this on camera, it's real simple. I usually will lay these out on my table in order like this. So this is going to be the first wing, and then this one's going to go on top of that, and then the shoulder is going to go on top of that. But because I have a limited space here, I just take a little bit of the rubber cement on my bodkin, and I'm going to smear that just maybe half an inch, 5/8 of an inch, something like that. You can go a little longer if you want, right along the rachis there. Then I take my second feather and I bring it over my thumb like this so that it doesn't get down into that head cement, or excuse me, that rubber cement, until at this point I'm pinching the two rachises together in my right hand. Then I'll bring my left hand out, and you'll see they pretty much lay right on top of each other. You can very easily move these if you have to slide them a little bit. Once they're in place, then I'll reorient, make certain I'm holding that well, and then I just gently press that down a little bit to work that rubber cement in those barbs. For the shoulder, it's just the same thing. I'm just going to put a little bit of head cement right there. Not head cement, I keep saying head cement, rubber cement. And then I'm going to take the shoulder and do the same thing, bringing it down over my thumb so that I can get the base together at the bottom. And then right here, see, I can even move that shoulder up a little bit to make certain that the rachis in that shoulder is in line with the rachis of the rest of the wing. And then I'll just gently press those together to work that rubber cement in there. And lastly, I'll do the same thing for the jungle cock. Just smear a little bit on there, take the jungle cock, lay it down, and I generally lay it down behind a little bit, pull it forward to get the base where I want it. And then I can still kind of move that a little bit if I need to move it up a little. And then I'll just gently press that together, and then I'll have one side of my wing complete. And then I'll have the other pieces and parts all processed, ready to glue. When I do these, like I said, I mass produce them. I do the nails first because a lot of times your nails will need a little bit of repair. I've got one here if I can pick it up. I use some the rubber cement to repair these. I will take a little bit of rubber cement on the backside here and just smooth that out, and that will pull that together and repair it. But I do that first, then I get the whites all together, and then I get the shoulders all out. And I process all of them to the point where then I'm ready to go through each set and glue them up. And then once that's done, they're all together, and I let them set and dry. One other quick tip, I use a separate bottle for my rubber cement. And the reason for that is that this will dry out just sitting here. Even if I crank down as hard as I can on this thing, I find that it starts getting thicker and thicker. So I will only pour maybe about a third of this bottle of rubber cement from the larger bottle. I don't know if it has to do with the seal that's on the inside of this lid compared to the regular rubber cement, but to keep it from drying out so quick, I just use smaller bottles.
How quick does that rubber cement dry?
Probably about an hour and a half, maybe.
The other question, do you buy several of those small bottles that when one gets kind of used up, you fill another one?
Well, that's a good question. Actually, I do buy several. You can go out on Amazon. That's where I got these. And you can get them for like, a dozen each. In one order, and they're like maybe 50 cents each. When this does dry out, like right now, it's already starting to get kind of thick. What I'll do when I notice it's getting so thick that when I put my bodkin in here, I'm not getting a whole lot off, or it's just really, really, a thick blob. Then what I do is I just set it out like that, and I'll leave it sit out like that for 3 or 4 days, and it will completely dry out. And then I can, once it's completely dried out, you just got a thin film of rubber cement in there. You can shove your finger down in there and just wipe it all out. It all comes right out, and the jar's clean. So I just reuse the same one. So that is the white ghost, and my technique for making the wings on these. I do find if you're going to get into these, try the process that I have, and I have 2 or 3 different videos on out on YouTube that also show you the same thing, maybe even a little bit clearer, how I put the wings together and everything.
Another little trick I've learned on your bucktail for your belly.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times, if you stack those hairs, it looks kind of cut off at the end. And a technique that I've used is after you stack that hair, take it out of the stacker and cut it off at a 45 or even steeper angle on the butt ends. Put it back in the stacker butt ends first.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And stack it, and it will give you a tapered end for the tips of those hairs.
I will try that. That is a good suggestion.
So they don't look like they've been cut off.
Yeah, Al, I just wanted to say Ian, thank you. That was an excellent presentation. Just a couple comments on the UV resin. It seems that tires have a tendency to hold the lamp too close to the fly when you're trying to cure the resin. And they've discovered that when the lamp is too close, the resin will cure deeply too quickly. You can't necessarily see it as you're doing it, but when you're on the water, that's when you notice it does crack. So holding the lamp further away from the fly while you're curing it makes a big difference. The other thing is the resin manufacturers are very much aware of the allergy issue. to the extent Deer Creek now has a version of their product that is allergy free.
Wow, I didn't
for
know that.
folks that have gotten away from UV resin that like it, want to come back, you might look up the Deer Creek resin or allergy free resin.
Thank you then, Ian. That was an absolutely fantastic presentation, as I kind
Very
of
welcome.
figured it was going to be. But I appreciate you, and we will be delighted to have you back at any time. We're going to talk about Grant and Pott weaving demo. And this is not going to be a weaving or fly tying or anything. I'm just going to clarify the questions that I got after last week's presentation on what is a Pott weave and what is a Grant weave. And we're only going to talk about hackle, not the body, though I've got all the information here for the body if we need to. But what we're going to do is I'm going to first start by introducing the materials to you. Over here, we've got 3 pot, and they're called pickups. And imagine, if you will, and this is fly line backing, but this is for the demo purposes, this is my hair. Each one of these is a different length. That's because the pot hackles get cut off. Now here is the same setup that we're going to have for Grant, but Grant had this wonderful little gauge that he used, and this one is a reproduction made by Todd Collins in Butte, Montana, who was one of Grant's students. So that's what I'll be using tonight. So that's the stuff that I'll be using tonight. The weaving loop will be that, and as you see, it's not obviously not going on any fly. We're just trying to show a purpose. And this is the patent for the Grant weave in October of 1939. Let me take a little tighter look at that. And what I want to point out is this is actually a weave and a knot. And we'll get into that here in just a minute. But right down here, I want you to notice that the material, this is the hair that's going to be woven, if you will. And it goes between the 2 portions or strands of the weaving loop. The bottom one is here, the top one is in the back. And I want you to notice that it goes through between them with the bottom in front of the material. That's important. And the way I remember it, it's only the way I remember it, is the guy's name was George F. Grant. Bottom strand of the loop in front of the weaving material, the hair. And when we get to Pott, it's the reverse, because it was Franz B. Pott. So you can, if that works for you, fine. If it doesn't, then it doesn't. Anyway, so it's moving right along. It comes up and around like this, behind, around, and now it goes in between and down. And the interesting thing about the Grant weave, it is a weave and a knot. And from this point forward, it comes down here out of sight, comes up and around and back through, and that's the knot. And we'll show you that in just a little bit here. And what I'm going to do now is switch to the loop, and I'm just going to go through that very, very briefly with a strand of chenille. That the bottom of the loop goes in front of the strand, and we're going to just pretend that that's a strand of hair, a pickup, or no, it was Grant called it a stick, and it comes around just like that, comes up like this. And how was that? Do you remember? Well, let's take a look. Comes around, it comes around and comes down through, just like that.
Now you want to go back to your,
Now we have to go back up and over.
you need to Go back to the vise, dear.
What, like that?
Al.
Oh,
You're
back
not
to
on the vise, Al.
I'm sorry. Thank you.
How-
Okay. Okay, back to the vise, and now it just comes up and over and gets knotted. So this part is the weave of the Grant, and this part is the knot. And that's the way his goes together. So let's just pull that out of there. We'll talk the same thing in a few minutes about the pot weave. And I'm just going to grab this. Now I set this up. This gauge is really a wonderful gauge that Todd Collins built for me, but my hands have gotten so bad that I can hardly open this thing to get the stuff in here. But what this thing is you take your hair and you measure it because you see, I got a black tip right here. And that's to indicate the tip of the hair because the Grant weave produces a hackle with the tips there at the very end. It's a very nice looking weave, as a matter of fact. But anyhow, the way that works is you slip this down in here, you bring it up, and the way I saw George Grant do it, and then subsequently Todd Collins, is that it was to come down around through and now it comes up and over to form the knot. So we've done the weave. Now we've formed the knot. I'll pull if I can get these hackle pliers off, I will. Oh, I got it. And then you just push it all together. Push it together, and then you tighten up the knot. And what you end up with is the knotted hackle pointing up at a slightly different angle, and then the hackle tips that are going to be used for the fly.
So what do you do with that?
This stays right here, and in the stuff that I've tied, I've cut it off when it gets time to tie the fly. I've cut them off real short, and sometimes just maybe a couple of eye widths back from there. But that knot holds it all together, and then you can jam it all together. But that is a Grant weave, and then you just continue doing that with more materials. Let's see what do we have.
I just leave all the strands together and pull them down, and you can get kind of like a two-toned hackle when you wrap it around the hook
Sure.
and cut the
Okay, got it.
long ones to the same length as the short ones.
Okay, well now let's go over here and we will take a quick look at the pot weave. And first thing I wanted to share with you is Pott didn't have just a weave. He had two of them. He patented one in 1924. It was a three-stranded weave, and this is what it looks like. And you can see right in here that there's a grouping of hair, if you will, and then it's a weave of actually a third strand of thread, then a weave of hair, then another weave of the third strand of hair, and so on, because it was a three-strand weave. One of the things about that weave, it's very unforgiving. You couldn't wiggle things around and make it fit into an area on the circumference of a hook. It was difficult. So in 31, I'm told that he went to the two-strand weave, and that was much more forgiving. And if you were in a situation where you needed to adjust the hackle, if you will, so it fit better in the circumference of the hook, that you could slide it back and forth. Well, this weave right here, like I said, was very unforgiving. So that's why he patented this, and almost every pot fly that was sold in the country from this time on was done with the two-strand weave. I could not find one with a three-strand. But anyway, let me get rid of that, and we'll do a pot weave for you real quick. And I'll just reach over here and What I'm going to do though is I'm going to start by just tying a knot, if you will, of this stuff here, just so I've got a knot to work against. Now we're going to just, now remember, on the pot weave, the material goes behind the front one, where on the Grant weave, the material has a stranded front. Well, now the pot weave is like this. It's just pushed down through, comes around, comes up this way. You pull it down and through. They slide back together. And it is strictly just a crisscross weave. And if you take a real tight shot on that, you can see that it's just, that's all it is just a crisscross weave. And what I always do is I just take this hackle pliers in and nick it right there just to keep it from coming apart.
Whereas the Grant weave doesn't come apart because it has a knot.
It's knotted. It doesn't come apart for the biggest part, no. So
Can you slip the Grant knot, the Grant weave? Can you tie
it slides back and forth reasonably good. It's a little tighter than the other, but it slides back and forth fairly good. Now, this may or may not have provided some clarification. I don't know, but I sure got a lot of questions about it. And the one thing that I did learn back when we wrote the book about 6 years ago, and subsequently I've done other searches, and right now the only sandy mite or mite type flies I can find on YouTube that are tied with the real pot weave are the ones that we published. I cannot find a single one that isn't a pot body and a Grant hackle put on it. I mean, my dear friend Randy Flynn, another Idaho guy, excellent tyer and presenter. He ties the sandy mite body just like Grant, like Pott did, but he puts a Grant hackle on it. I don't know why people don't do more of the pot weave. To me, it's easier than the Grant weave, but it's whatever they do. I don't plan on getting too much into this because I think Dutch Baughman does one heck of a job on presenting the that weaving style. At least he has in the past. And but any questions out there?
Al, let
Okay.
me jump in here just for a second. You're exactly right. Interesting part of the history of this technique is that Franz Pott developed his method of weaving using the 3 strands, just as you said, 3 threads in his loom. He had other people actually dress the bodies and so forth, but he did all of the weaving of hair hackle himself. And I had a privilege to tie with George at Frank Johnson's shop there in Missoula back soon after Frank got his Busick. And it was a life-changing kind of an experience because I'd read George's books and then I watched him actually do it. He had changed some things, but he told the story about how frustrated he was and other tyers at that time because Franz Pott was very parochial. He would not share with anybody, even his people in his company, how he actually did the weave with three strands. And George said that he spent years trying to figure that out, but never could do it. And that's why he went to the 2-strand, and he patented that in 31. But the 2-strand method was used by everybody else forever, and even to this day, because nobody could figure out what Franz actually did on the 3-strand loom. But the 2-strand loom, the results are even stronger, I think. But the hair hackle, there's a whole nother story behind this stuff, but thank you for bringing this forward, Al. There's a great history to this, and I think the woven hair hackle has an incredible function even still to this day.
Is a part of the program when you get to share it with all of us. And we're going to start out tonight, though, with our good friend Evelyn. Yes, Evelyn, it's going to be
Yes.
you.
Okay, here we
There you
go.
are. And there's the
Whoops.
flyer that you did for Ian. Ian,
Yes.
if you're going to write a book, here's your illustrator. Evelyn, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you.
You're welcome.
That's wonderful. Thank you.
Everything in there.
Okay, Jeff, you got the
Yeah,
spotlight.
I know, I just saw yours, and this is something I'm very proud of too. Todd Collins did build this one for me.
Yep.
And I also bought some horsehair and some other stuff, mane and what and the fly materials to tie those to do the hackles, and then learn some of the weaving from Randy, of course, with even the bodies, learning some of those bodies.
Sure, sure.
Just want to say thank you.
You betcha. Well, that's it for tonight, folks. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll see you next week. Until next time, good tying.